Bad neighbours. Strange smelling house. Everyone has, once in their lifetime, had those extremely annoying no-good neighbours that drive you mad every other day. But whatever you've faced, it's probably nothing compared to these extremely bad neighbours in a small Madagascar village, located near the ever-peaceful city of Toliara. A late-night party, loud music and noisy habits are nothing compared to what neighbours in this small village went through. It all started when almost everyone in the neighbourhood noticed a strange smell coming from a seemingly vacant house. They all tried their best to ignore the smell, but they knew something was wrong. At first, the smell was so bad it took everyone quite a while to figure out it was coming from the house itself. After all, when you smell something bad, your first thought is something's gone wrong with the sewerage or the drainage pipes. But eventually, everyone realised the smell came from the house itself. It was such a strong, nasty smell that it was smothering the whole neighbourhood. It went on to be a problem since no one wanted to point fingers at anyone else, so the issue became worse and worse. Finally, one day, all the nearby neighbours got together to investigate the smell, and found out that the smell was coming from the abandoned house down the street. At first, the neighbours wanted to involve the police, but one neighbour brought up a very good point. He reasoned with the others that it was absurd to call the police over something they weren't even sure about. That since it was just an abandoned house, they could all just investigate the smell themselves. But what they found out was very surprising. Surprisingly, the house, even though it looked like it was in its last stages, was not empty. Rather, the house was actually occupied by 3 people who seemed to be going in and out very secretively. This was a shock to the neighbours because they had never before interacted with anyone from that house. And it further complicated things because now the neighbours were sure there was something fishy going on. How could the people who lived there stand that smell? No one could stand to go near that house because of the smell, let alone consider living in it. The people in the neighbourhood once again got together to decide whether or not to call the police. But before any decision could be made, one day the smell suddenly disappeared. This was like a breath of fresh air for the neighbours, pun intended. Finally, they could go about their normal daily life activities without being assaulted by that horrible odour. But was this the end of it? Nope. This was just the start of a very horrifying story. Just when the neighbours thought it was all well, the terrible smell came back in full force. This time, when everyone came together to discuss the issue, no one had any doubt that the smell was originating from that one particular rundown house. But since they couldn't trespass on someone's private property, they decided to involve the police. They called the police and informed them how the smell was very troubling for the neighbourhood, and that it was suspicious and it was of rancid nature. This gained the officers' attention and they showed up to investigate. But the police were in for a surprise, because what they found was something they had never before dealt with. The officers showed up to investigate the house, but they didn't come alone. As they didn't know what the cause of the rancid odour was, they came prepared with a team of specialists and a medical examiner. Upon arriving, the officers were overwhelmed by the pungent smell. They couldn't place just what it was. But because it was so unique, they quickly called the nearest expert from the Wildlife Committee. Sori Rayrian Jafasinka was the wildlife expert who rose up to the occasion. You might be thinking, why the police immediately thought of contacting the Wildlife Committee? This is because the environmental agencies in Madagascar have been established for a long time. It has seen more than its fair share of mind-boggling incidents concerning animals. There is little that the wildlife community hadn't faced, but even they were horrified at what they found in that house. As soon as Sori neared the house, she was at a loss as what could be making that sort of smell. Even though she was very experienced in this field, she was confounded. The whole team braced themselves and circled the yard to get to the back. This was a very good decision, because as soon as they rounded the corner, they came face to face with several people digging holes in the backyard. As soon as they saw it was the police, they raised their hands, shovels and all. This was very strange because the police had not even questioned them. But when the police did start to question them about the smell and their suspicious behaviour, all the people who had been digging holes started acting shifty. This confirmed that they were guilty of something. But what exactly had they done? And more importantly, what was that smell? By the time the police had finished questioning the suspects and arrested them, Sori was almost certain that this smell was of animal origin. She explained to the police how only animals trapped indoors for long periods could create such pungent smells. She was impatient to liberate any animal from the ramshackled house. It was clear to her that no animal who had been living in a house that had such a strange odour coming from it would be in any good condition. There was no doubt a lot of abuse was inflicted on the poor animals. But before Sori could rush to the rescue of whatever animal was trapped inside, the police reminded her to be cautious, as there might be more people in the house. But as the team neared the house, it became very evident that there was no way that people actually stayed inside the house for long stretches of time. The pungent smell was practically unbearable and nausea-inducing. The police broke down the locked door and entered the house, but what they saw was beyond anything they had imagined. The inside of the house smelled 10 times worse than the outside, especially because of the fact that all the windows were closed, which meant no fresh air was allowed to cross. If anyone thought the house looked bad from the outside, the interior was even worse. The interior had been completely destroyed. There was no light. Cobwebs permeated the windows, the doors and the ceiling, and the walls had gone mouldy. The whole team slowly traversed through the house. Sori was visibly distressed and impatient to find whatever animal it was that was so badly abused. What the team found in multiple rooms made them shocked to the core. In some of the rooms of the house, the floor was moving. This startled quite a few of the team, but upon closer look, they realised what it was they were looking at. What could it be that made the floor of the house move? After turning on their torches, everyone was alarmed to find that every possible surface of the house was covered with tortoises. Yes, you heard us, tortoises. As Sori had guessed, there were animals inside the house. But not even in her wildest dreams could Sori have guessed just how many tortoises were in the house. Can you guess how many tortoises there were? We certainly fell extremely short of the exact number of tortoises in that house. There, in that ramshackle house, in a peaceful village in Madagascar, were a staggering 9,000 tortoises. 9,000 tortoises were crammed into that house, with no care given. The smell coming from the house was because they weren't at all taken care of. They were left to their own devices and wouldn't even be let out to relieve themselves. As a result, all the tortoises were living in their own fecal matter. Sori was appalled when she saw this, and what was worse, she had figured out just why these people had 9,000 of these tortoises trapped in their house. She immediately contacted the Wildlife Committee and requested backup with special instructions. Sori was in a frenzy, and nothing could stop her until the tortoises had been helped. But what was it that she had realised? As soon as she had examined the tortoises closely, Sori knew these were no ordinary tortoises, but rather these were one of the rarest and special tortoises named radiated tortoises, very rare in this particular species of tortoise seen in the wild. Only a small number of radiated tortoises were found in Madagascar. They are known for their docile nature and the unique marking on their shells. What was confusing to everyone, except Sori, was why there was 9,000 of these little guys in this particular house. This was because the rarity of this particular species of tortoise made it ever more covetable. Criminals poach these creatures and sell them to invested buyers. People like owning tortoises as their pets, even though keeping endangered animals as pets is clearly punishable by law. A more extreme side of this trade is that most people eat these rare animals as a delicacy. High prices are fetched by poaching these animals to buyers who see these animals as a delicacy. Because of how this species is treated, it is almost extinct. Which is why this crime felt even more heinous than it already was. The tortoises in the house were carefully removed from the house as early as possible and relocated to a safe and clean place. But the animals had been so horrendously treated that it was clear to the wildlife experts that not all the tortoises would survive the coming days. They had been so horribly mistreated that many of the tortoises were on the brink of death, and most of them had gone blind. But the team was very optimistic about the fact that such a large number of tortoises were saved. But was this the end? Unfortunately, this was not the end of the troubles for these poor creatures. The team, which was so happy with finding and saving the poor creatures, soon learned the very hard truth. It was discovered that because of the mistreatment and abuse of the tortoises that they had received, many of the tortoises weren't going to survive more than a week. A large number of them were dehydrated and sick, and even though the vets did all they could, pulling double shifts and all-nighters, in the end they could not save all the tortoises. A large number of those tortoises perished due to the neglect they had faced. Only near to 8,000 tortoises were left alive from the original 9,000, which was a huge blow to the team. In the end, they were placed in special conservation, as they couldn't be assimilated back into the wild. After living so long in that house, the tortoises were no longer accustomed to the wild, and now had to spend the rest of their life in conservation, closely looked after by a team of specialists. But what happened to the criminals? Not only were these people illegal smugglers, they were also guilty of animal cruelty to 9,000 tortoises. The whole of the neighbourhood could scarcely believe what had happened in their neighbourhood. As such, everyone clamoured for a harsh punishment to be doled out. In the end, the court announced that they were to receive long prison sentences for their crimes. I guess this is what getting a taste of one's own medicine looks like. Doesn't this just make you believe that in the end, justice always prevails? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable but true stories like this.